I grew up the son of an engineer, and I had a lot of gadgets growing up and was obsessed with them. But I think I realized growing up I would play with gadgets because I was shy, I didn't necessarily know how to talk to people, or I was looking for some way to master the universe around me using tools. And as I got older, I think I'd outgrown my gadget lust. And so that's what I think I have to bring to the conversation. I think there are people who are more technical, and there are people who are better at life in general, but I think I've got a good cross of the two, and I'm willing to say I'm an expert on this gadget, but I'm also going to say you probably don't need this at all. And advertising is a beautiful communication medium, and the greatest thing I learned from advertising was that you may be doing content that millions of people will read, but you should still write it for one person. And you're talking to all these people, but you're not addressing a stadium. You're looking at one person and you're talking to them, and then you're having that same conversation with the person next to them, so on and so forth. And so when I get copy that reads like magazine copy, which I think often has that tone of someone speaking out loud to kind of hear their own voice, I'll ask writers to rewrite it, but write it just for me, or write it just for their sister, or write it for their father. And that's when the tone gets great. The tone becomes incredibly honest, and that's just a hallmark of any work that I've edited. I don't like it to sound canned. We're trying to talk to each other. And I think online, when you see columnists arguing against columnist, arguing against commenter, and just being really kind of nasty to each other, or not listening to each other, and just arguing in this really insincere kind of way, it's a waste of time, and you might as well not even do it in the first place. So yeah, I love when people can just speak to each other honestly. And just because we're speaking online doesn't mean it should be any less honest than when we're face to face. I'll tell you, the greater purpose for Wirecutter in my life, I fall in love with the work every morning when I start it, and there's a point in the day where I have to stop doing it because I have some other work that I do that is also really exciting to me. I write about the oceans and technology, and that's going to be my work for the rest of my life. It's going to be advocating people understanding and caring for the oceans more. So when people say you should do what you care about, I think that's a little bit confusing because it's not necessarily actionable, and giving actionable advice is another thing I really like about the Wirecutter. But I would take that advice of doing what you want to do, and I'd make it more actionable by saying, what are you really good at now, and what are you paid for now, and what do you want to do in a few years, and where did those things intersect? And so Wirecutter works for readers because it's succinct and actionable, and they don't need to read 4 or 5 hours of reviews and Googling and Amazon reviews to figure out what I think they should get. And it works from the business sense too, but it also was designed to work for me personally because I didn't want to spend another day writing up press releases and news that I didn't think was important. And the more context and experience I have in life, I think important news and tech comes along every 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a month, sometimes 2 months. I've been doing this for 10 years. And if you've been doing it that long, you know when things are not real. The unfortunate thing is, you can't picture a publication that hires a writer and says, why don't you only write what's important? Why don't you just leave 90% of the junk that companies want us to write about just because it makes them look better? Why don't you just leave that alone and not write it? There are publications that do that. I think you can work at the New York Times and be allowed to leave stories alone. But by and large, you are a writer. Every tech writer I know is always writing up stuff they don't like. I couldn't spend another day doing that. So Wirecutter was made to be mostly built around evergreen content that would be useful.